Good evening, and welcome back to A to G Lifestyle. We're here for episode 2 of this Saturday, January 14th. We're about to hop into it. We ended the other one a little bit short because we ran out of content. Not necessarily, but we decided that this one is the one. This is the one, ladies and gentlemen. I don't need to see any more or say any more. This is the one that will take a decent amount of talking time. We have been excited to talk about this topic for a little while. How are we doing again, gentlemen?
Doing great. We're doing great. I'm real excited about this topic. It's going to be different, right? I'm very interested about Gavin's perspective, especially since he's a new Christian. We talked about that a little bit at the end of the stream. Chris may be upset that I'm not as excited about his opinion, but I already know what his opinion is because I think we talked about it when it came out. So We'll see what happens here. It should be good. It should be good topic. Like, subscribe, share. We can't do this without the chat. Shout out to the chat. We got Jesse in the chat. Very exciting stuff. Hopefully we'll get some other people in the chat. Maybe we'll have a good discussion. Maybe we'll talk about what you guys want to talk about. We like to interact with you guys. So like, share, subscribe. Gavin, you have anything you want to say about the show before we start here?
I just wanted to add on, I'm also super excited. Like, when doing the research for both of these episodes, I'm like, ooh, but what if I just wanted to only look at the Dobbs stuff? What if I only wanted to do that? So I'm super excited to be talking about this with you gentlemen tonight. This will be fun.
It's about to be lit indeed. But before we get into it, just for repetition's sake, like we did on the first episode, for those of you who might be tuning in for the first time tonight on this episode, I asked these two lovely gentlemen what their A to G lifestyle moment of the week was. And that's going to be a part of the way we introduce these shows going forward. It'll just be us each giving our own nitpick about our last week and what we feel like we did well, or a behavior that we demonstrated well, that we feel we performed in a confident, disciplined, effective, efficient, or focused manner. So, would you like to kick us off, Andreas? Good sir.
So I got to pick something different, right?
No, you can pick the same one.
No, I got to pick something different. That's what we got to do.
Oh, snap. Okay.
Okay, so let's see here. So this week, something that I did that I thought was good and Christian and Christ-like is I worked and talked with my coworkers about various topics and things, and did it in the best way I could. I worked with some Muslims, and that's very exciting stuff. Very different perspective on life. So that was good.
Nice. Gavin?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of add on to there. I kind of feel like I have been efficient and focused this past week or two. I've been like super crazy busy because I've been getting coffee with like anyone I can think of. And it's about, I'd say 75% of the time, I'm just being a disciple there. Feel like I'm doing a good job on it. I'm focused on it. Feel like I'm being effective and efficient. That's the goal, at least.
Amen, brother. You'll love to see it. Since we're in the spirit of picking new things for some strange reason, I'm going to say that mine is going to be the fact that I'm getting more efficient with my scheduling. So I'm getting in a routine, like more so. So I'm going to bed more consistently at the same time every evening, and I'm waking up more consistently at the same time every morning. So I'm getting myself into a rhythm so that the day doesn't tire me out as much as it has in years past. But I think that kind of sums up our intro. Does it, gentlemen?
Yep.
Are we ready to get into this spicy topic?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Chris,
absolutely.
do you want to do the background this time? And then we'll talk about the what happened.
I got you. I'm your background guy. I am your topic introduction guy, which is what I'm about to do right about now. So, for those of you who aren't aware, which if you aren't aware, you're probably in the minority, but on June 24th, 2022, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision on a case by a 6-3 vote that was overruled, or did actually overrule, the Roe v. Wade decision from 1973. It also overruled the Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision of 1992. And this case was called the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, as it was Mississippi State Health Department officer, Thomas Dobbs, against the only abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi. The case concerned the constitutional nature of a 2018 Mississippi abortion law that banned abortion operations after the first 15 weeks of pregnancy. And lower courts in the state had actually prevented the enforcement of the law with preliminary injunctions, which I guess are legal and equitable remedy that compels the party to refrain from specific actions, I guess. Andreas is our resident lawyer here, so I'm sure he's going to critique me on that.
Not a lawyer.
But I probably butchered it. But anyway, that's effectively what it is from the common person's perspective. But anyways, these injunctions were based on the ruling of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which prevented states from banning abortion before fetal viability, which I guess is within the first 24 weeks of pregnancy. This was based on the assumption, this decision rather was based on the assumption that a woman's choice to abort during that time was protected by the due process clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which says, or rather prohibits the arbitrary deprivation of life, liberty, and property. So, I mean, there you go. But the Dobbs decision reversed those lower court rulings, holding to a position that abortion is not a constitutional right, that 14th Amendment application is not reasonable. And as such, the abortion has never really been deeply rooted in the Constitution or American history in general. So that overrule was made, and this decision brought about the authority of abortion regulation to go back to each individual state to make their own abortion regulations and laws. So with that said, I'm going to open it up to the gang because I know they've been looking forward to talking about this for a long time. Andreas, would you like to kick us off, sir?
Sure. Well, let's talk about the initial Roe v. Wade decision. That decision was manufactured by the court in order to allow abortion to become a right. And so basically what happened is they took several different amendments and talked about penumbras and emanations and all sorts of other mumbo jumbo in order to create a right out of something that wasn't explicitly written into the Constitution. And this is a problem because, this was not discussed amongst the government before it really happened, right? The states didn't agree to this amendment. The courts decided as an activist here, we're going to make a right. We're going to add our own quote unquote amendment to the Constitution, even though it wasn't an amendment, giving the right to abortion to women under the notion of privacy and government interference. But that privacy only related to a woman in the ability for her to end a pregnancy. So she did not have any other privacy interest, right? We see this right now with the vaccine cases that happened last year, where we thought, which was incorrect, that we had a privacy interest in our vaccine status, right? And that wasn't the case. Because we thought it'd be similar to Roe v. Wade, right, where you had a privacy interest in your medical information, but they said no, that's not what it is, and therefore, that privacy interest was only involved with a woman who wants to end a pregnancy. And what Dobbs did, Dobbs said, well, we kind of made up an amendment, we kind of made up a constitutional ability for women to have from scratch. And we're going to say, okay, we're going to return that issue to the states. That being the proper and right thing to do, because the states have all of the authority not given to the federal government. Because in our country, unlike a lot of country, the federal government derives its power from the states, which derives its power from the people, and not that the states, right, or provinces, it would be in other country, get their power from the government, etc. So it's kind of backwards to most other countries where the federal government is only able to do what it's been given the authority to do by the states. And since this was created by just the federal government outside of the authority of the states, it was the right thing to return the issue back to the states. Gavin, do you have any other thing you want to say about the initial decision before we talk about the underlying issues?
No, I just I want to one of the things that in my research of the case was I didn't really understand how it got like they derived the right to abortion from the due process clause. Do you know anything about that? Do you think you could elaborate on that, Andreas?
Um, they made it up. I'm just going to say that blankly and clearly as I can. They made it up. As I alluded to, there's penumbras and emanations is how they came up with it, as is the wording, if I'm not mistaken, within the original decision. So there was a penumbra and an emanation from this amendment, from that amendment, etc., to which they used to create the create this decision. That's why it was always on shaky ground legally. Even Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that this it is the decision wasn't decided rightly, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not saying her exact words, but she said it wasn't decided rightly, and she's the left side of the political persuasion inside of the court before she died. And so, it was made up whole cloth, and that's why it was so easy for the court to just scrap it entirely, because it wasn't defined within the Constitution nor the amendments. And that was the right thing to do. Before the decision was handed down, I listened to several debates between people, and they were discussing that Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey should be upheld in the courts because of stare decisis, and them previously ruling that way, and people having a reliance interest now on the ruling before that was incorrect. But if that ruling is based on something that is not true and is an incorrect ruling, then it needs to be the responsibility, and should be the responsibility, of the courts to fix that previous improper ruling, and not keep an improper ruling for the sake of maintaining we ruled this way once, so we're going to continue to rule this way. If we kept doing that and we kept that logic, we would still have, what was it? Is it Plessy v. Ferguson, where they discussed a African American man and his how African American was he, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look that up real quick. And we would have kept that as a ruling if we were not able to get rid of previous rulings that were not based on truth, and that truth being what we wrote and decided and agreed to within the Constitution.
Nice. So what effectively, if I'm understanding this as a mere mortal typical person, which I am as it pertains to this particular instance, and I'm sure most of our viewers probably are as well, effectively what you're saying is when they made the initial Roe v. Wade decision, they made it by taking certain bits and pieces of the Constitution out of context and putting them together to form this precedent idea.
Kind of. They took bits and pieces and they said, okay, because of all these bits and pieces, there's a penumbra, which, let's define that word.
Yeah, please.
I got to look it up here.
Oh, the great oracle. What's the great oracle got for us?
Okay. There's a shadow cast, right? In this case, it's saying from the earth. So there's a penumbra cast by those amendments and the Constitution that there's a right to abortion.
Okay.
So that's what they did. They also did something strange in the initial Roe v. Wade decision, where they came up with a 3-trimester framework for when you could and could not have abortions, which there is no way they could come up with from the Constitution, because they couldn't have figured out, right, that there is this trimester where you're allowed to do abortion, because there's nowhere that's written in any of the amendments or the Constitution. So they were making legislation whole cloth and saying it's from the penumbra of the amendments. So it was on very shaky ground to begin with. And I just looked up the Plessy v. Ferguson so I could talk about it. And it's the Supreme Court's case that said that separate but equal was constitutional. So if we were bound by previous Supreme Court rulings just for the sake of being bound by it, then we would still have segregation because that Supreme Court ruling ruled that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. You can't, just because something was decided a long time ago doesn't mean that it can't be overturned, right? So, I mean, that just makes sense.
Especially if it was decided wrong. That's what it
yeah,
is. If it's
yeah.
decided wrong, it should be overturned, regardless of whether or not, it's been precedent for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been on shaky ground. So if something's on shaky ground, regardless of how long it's been a thing, it should be, and it probably will be overturned if approached from the appropriate perspective in an objective sense, right? But I mean, I guess this
Unless
gets to
it's
something
Wickard
else.
v. Filburn. If it's Wickard v. Filburn, it's never getting overturned, even though it should be.
I have no idea what that is. Resident, you're gonna have
Yeah.
to. You're the resident legal expert,
Resident
so all of this
lawyer.
is like common folk talk to you. This is like you saying to your homie who's also a resident legal expert, "Yo, what's up?" So if you'd like to talk about that a little bit more, I think that'd be pretty cool.
About Wickard v. Filburn.
Mhm.
Well, Wickard v. Filburn is what, if I'm not mistaken, establishes the Dormant Commerce Clause, which says, basically what happened is there was a farmer, and the law stated he could only grow so much wheat. Don't quote me. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but he could only grow so much wheat because of reasons the government said, and he got sued, and it established. Well, he was growing wheat for his own livestock. That's the big thing. That's the big part of this, and it got established that that because he was growing wheat for his livestock, it interfered with interstate commerce because he wouldn't buy wheat that was on the market. So therefore, the government had the ability to regulate his growing of wheat because since he couldn't buy he wouldn't buy from the market because he grew it himself. Therefore, they had the authority to establish that he could only grow so much goods. And that evolved into our Dormant Commerce Clause, where the government says we can regulate anything if it has an interference. And their definition of interference is that small that you're not buying of something is interference with interstate commerce. Therefore, they can regulate that activity. So Wickard v. Filburn's never going away, and it is, in my opinion, improperly decided because that is far too much of an overreach for the authority given to the government in which they're allowed to regulate interstate commerce. But stopping somebody from growing wheat on their own property for their own animals because they're not going to buy from the market is too much. At least in my opinion, that's too much. And that's never getting overturned. I also don't think Chevron deference is ever going to get overturned. Sorry, Kurt, from Uncivil Law. Your hopes and dreams will forever be slashed because they'll just never do it. Even though I agree with you, it should be overturned. Hope to see you in Houston, Kurt. It'll be a good time. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that's I guess
side topic.
So yeah, a whole lot of legal spiel. But Gavin, you seemed like you wanted to talk about something, and you were just getting super antsy to talk about it. So I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
Oh, I was just kind of like, I don't understand how the federal government was like, he is not buying things, therefore we have the power to regulate to make him buy things. That's hokey, dude. That's all that I really had to say there.
Well, they weren't regulating that he can buy things. They were saying that since he's not buying things, therefore he's interfering with the market. So they're not forcing him to buy something. They're saying since he's not buying something, therefore we can regulate it.
Yeah. And I'm just like, how is that even? I'm on your side, man. That's bogus.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, fair enough, right? I mean, fair enough. There's not really anything else much more to say about that. But I guess that gets into another issue, like I was going to say a little bit earlier. A lot of people have been hammering on the justices that kind of contributed to this whole decision, especially considering 3 of them were appointed by former President Trump and are conservative and had a decent sway in this ruling, right? And a lot of the hammering comes down on the fact that during their, I guess, what do you call it? When the justices are sworn in, or before they're sworn in, what's it called with the Senate?
Confirmation.
When they're being confirmed, they were asked about Roe v. Wade, and apparently the vibe that everyone got was that they're not going to overturn it. So a lot of people were very upset and felt like they were backstabbed when it was overturned. Do we have anything to say about that?
Absolutely have something to say about that.
Oh,
when judges are bringing up Well, when judges are talking about stuff, they're not supposed to comment on how they are going to rule in a particular case. It's just an ethics thing that a lot of them do. I don't know if it's a formalized ethic, but in discussions I've seen amongst lawyers and amongst that they're not supposed to comment, right? Because they don't have the facts of the hypothetical case before them. So how are they supposed to comment on what they're going to do, right? And it's just bad form to say, "Oh, I'm going to overturn Roe v. Wade," right? When they don't understand or don't know the facts of how somebody's going to attack that Roe v. Wade issue. So them not answering and them saying that they're going to stick with precedent, or that, they don't know what they're going to do, or that they're going to follow the Constitution, is really all they can say about the issue, right? Because you can't tip your hat on how you want somebody to bring a lawsuit to remove something, unless you're Justice Thomas and you think that all due process discussions should be removed, and all judicial decisions based on due process need to be changed because it's wrong. And he puts that in every single one of his concurrences, or what is it called, dissents, that he does that relate to substantive due process. So unless you're Justice Thomas, you're not supposed to broadcast how you want somebody to bring a suit in order for you to change how the law works.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I think that's reasonable. But I mean, that's pretty much the background. Do we have anything else to add to the background? Because I'm about to open the can of worms.
I think the only thing that we still need to touch on in the background is just what actually happened after the ruling came
Yeah,
out.
okay.
But
there you go.
it was just like on June 24th, as you know, not yet Christian. I was a part of those protests that erupted nationwide due to this ruling. I remember like seeing the news come out in the morning and then being in an organized protest that very same night and hearing about them nationwide too. And there was also a 10,000 strong protest in Washington on July 9th. Nothing ever came to fruition from any of those things. But another, like, that's really been one of the biggest things from people on the ground. There hasn't really been much since then, but another aspect of the ramifications of it were there were a lot of states that had trigger bans going into this sort of thing. They were preparing for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. I don't know if it was party collaboration or them being like, hey, these guys were overstepping their judicial bounds in their confirmations and commenting on Roe v. Wade. But there were, the news doesn't get a clear answer. It's somewhere between 11 to 13 states had trigger bans ready to go into effect once it was overturned. And, like they're all basically southern states. They're the Dixie Belt in all honesty. But it was just really interesting to see that sort of play out. But since then, there's not really been a whole lot on the ground. Since then, there's been in the midterms, that was something that people voted on, overturning Roe v. Wade. That was something like, these senators voted for it, so I'm not voting for them. Or they were a fan of overturning Roe v. Wade, so therefore I'm not voting for them. In the midterms, there were a couple states that added, that enshrined the right to abortion within their state constitutions, which have fun, friends. There were a couple others that were like, they passed, I don't know what the right wording is, but they passed laws protecting the right to an abortion or non-restrictive ones. But that's really been all that I've kind of seen since then. What do you guys have anything else to add on to that?
Yeah, states like Colorado and California, and a lot of the states up in the East Coast, right? They immediately put in, okay, we're going to enshrine abortion into our constitutions or whatever nonsense. So the big hubbub right after the decision right, where they're going to ban abortions everywhere, is simply not the case, and is not what happened. If you're in a blue state, right, your abortion is likely still going to be allowed within the state. Even so much that, in California and Colorado, and I think it's New York, right, they have abortion up to birth as an option. And California has their statement of, well, we don't want to investigate cases of infanticide up to 7 days after birth in case it was an abortion, right? So that's all what happened right after that. And it's not like if the federal government's saying we don't have the authority, right, to regulate abortion as the federal government, it's not within our abilities. It's not been given to us by the states. They're not just going to be able to ban abortion outright nationwide. It's not within their ability or power, even if they vote on it and get it approved through the Congress, the Senate, and the president, unless it's an amendment, right? And that's the issue, and nobody realizes that, or nobody wants to realize that, right? Let's say that Kevin McCarthy right now puts a ban of abortion right now through the House, and it gets through the Senate, and then gets to the president, and Biden for some reason signs it, right? As a Democrat, even he wouldn't, right? That's part of his platform. And it gets put in as nationwide law. It's going to get overturned by the Dobbs decision, because the Dobbs said that this is not an issue delegated to the federal government, right? And it's not an amendment or part of the Constitution, so they don't have the authority to do it. So that's what I want to say there. And so a lot of this reaction that we saw was unfounded, because in your California, you're going to be able to get your abortion. In your Texas, you're not. Right. And that's because the people of Texas said, no, we're not going to allow abortion in the state of Texas. Right. Or your Louisiana or your Missouri or whatever those states were. I don't have the list off the top of my head, but I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. That gets into an issue there where, kind of like we were talking about on last episode, where like people either don't know and don't want to know, or just don't know. Either way, it's not a good thing, because it shows that a lot of these responses that we were seeing with all the rioting and the protesting and the responses were mostly generated in a premeditated sense. Whereas they heard Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned, and without looking at any of the details of the case that was going to overturn it, they by default were like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't know. And I don't care to know. I'm just upset that certain ruling was overturned. And that's very, very frustrating. But I mean, to Gavin's point again about the midterms, there's one thing that can be said for sure about this overturning of Roe v. Wade. I guess that's kind of what we referred to it as, even though it's the Dobbs decision. We all know it as the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The thing is, it had a huge impact in the midterms. Gigantic. Like, if you were a Republican candidate who had even a whiff of pro-life on you, or some sort of relationship to Donald Trump or endorsement by Donald Trump, you just lost. Majority of the time, you lost. Most of those elections were lost. So it had a huge impact around the country. But now it's time to open. It's time to open the can of worms, gentlemen. So the question is, why did this happen? Why is it that the Supreme Court ruled the way they did? And why is it that people responded the way they did? You can address either one of those in whatever order you want to.
Well, I think we already discussed why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did. They kind of had to. Well, I guess they didn't have to, but if they were going to be constitutionally consistent, not precedents consistent, they had to overturn Roe v. Wade. Right? There's no way they could have justified it. They could have made stuff up. They could have said there's more penumbras that say it's justified. Before the ruling came down, that people were speculating that they were going to move in order to keep the ruling of Roe v. Wade up. They would have moved the time of viability up to, say, 14 weeks or sooner. But it happened that way because that's the way the Constitution makes it happen. But that they don't have to rule that way. It's just what happened. The response, I think people are responding that way because that's, they want the ability to use, and this might sound offensive because it is to these people, they want to be able to use abortion as birth control. is really what they want. They want it as their last stop for birth control in order to prevent having a child that they don't think they're ready for. So they want that ability and that option, and they felt like they were losing that option because of this decision. And that's why they got upset when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And they got upset in states that they weren't even living in, because they thought that, the people of those states are going to be upset that they lost that opportunity for abortion in order to prevent pregnancy and children. Gavin?
Yeah, I don't like, I agree with why it was overturned on the like Supreme Court level. I feel like it was a little bit more politically motivated, aside from like it's not constitutionally upheld. But I kind of feel like, with that breaking of precedent and the confirmation, there was a more of an agenda there. I can't speak on to what that agenda is. That's just from a leftist family who consumes leftist media. That's just generally what it seems like from the news that I have been given. But speaking on to the people's reaction part, it's just, no matter what side of the, like, abortion is just one of those things that just, it's going to spark an emotional reaction. That is one of the most precious things to people ever, is babies. You can't do anything about that. And no matter what you do, abortion is, if you don't consider it killing a baby, then you're stopping a human life from developing. If you don't consider it killing a baby, stopping an abortion puts an end to a possible human life. And when you look at it like that, there's no wonder that people got inflamed. There's the people that want that, that obviously don't want that, because that's not a great thing to be fighting for, to have the right for. But also too, like, on the other side, the pro-abortion, like, babies are a big deal. Like in some instances of like rape or incest, they can, like, that baby is not going to be loved, or just, it's not going to grow up entirely correct, because in cases of incest, no, the genetics are no, but also with rape, it's, they're not going to, they don't have a father. There's no father figure in their life. It's a kid they didn't want and didn't plan for. But also too, they're a massive economic, they take a lot of your salary. They take a lot of your time. And when you're not prepared for that, it's a really scary and daunting thing. So on either side of the spectrum, you're going to have emotions inflamed, whether it's from its a morality perspective or from an economic perspective. But that's why I think people just got so up in arms about it. And that's also, tying back into the previous episode, it's sensational news and people watch it, they'll consume it, they get the ad revenue from it. There's all of that plays into that issue. But that's just my hot take on it.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, also, by the way, shout out to Jesse. We completely missed his comment from earlier. Yeah, last time we paid taxes on crop was in biblical times, in reference to your whole lawsuit about the wheat. There you go. But anyways, back on topic. I think personally for me, this seems like it's a fight for understanding. And it seems like it's a fight for understanding of just basic things that you think that we'd understand. Like, I'm looking again at that part of the 14th Amendment that they tried to use to justify Roe v. Wade, the prohibition of arbitrary deprivation of life, liberty, or property. So now, what I'm thinking in my head, okay, we got this fetus, right? It's this big, roughly, right? It's not small. Debate about it all you want, whether it's a life or not. Let's just take this and assess it and compare it to the 14th Amendment. All right, so is the existence of this the deprivation of life? but I don't necessarily think so. I don't think any life is being deprived in the situation of a fetus existing in the mother's womb. Is it a deprivation of liberty? I mean, people like to make the argument that it's a deprivation of liberty for the mother, but I mean, at the same time, mother engaged most of the time in consensual sexual intercourse. So, I mean, she made that decision. She knew what would happen if she didn't take appropriate measures. I don't think it's a fair claim to make that it's a deprivation of liberty. And then you have the deprivation of property. Obviously, the fetus is not property. That's not something that anyone's saying. Hopefully, maybe a few people are, but thankfully they're not mainstream. But that just gets to the issue. Like, we need to understand what things say. We need to understand why things are written and what they're written about. There's nowhere in that justification that suggests that a fetus should have, or rather a mother should have the ability to kill a being. And for the record, yes, a fetus is a life. Like, it is viable. A fetus is a life. Here's a fun fact for you. Ever since you were this big in your mother's womb to however big you are now, however old you are now, you have not gained a single more bit or piece of information in your DNA since this point in time. The only difference between you here and you now as an adult or however old you are is just, what did I say last time I said I was talking about this? It was like air, water, food, space. Like, that's literally it. That's the only difference between you here and you here. So I don't really understand why this is an issue for people to understand, for people to just get on board with. Like, this is a life. Like, it's okay if you stand behind the whole issue of it not being, or it being a life, but you still think that the practice of abortion is okay. At least then you're being honest, and we can have a discussion about that. But to say that this is not a life, and the only thing that it needs is time, and it'll properly turn into a human being the majority of the time, all health issues aside. I like the way Bill Burr puts it. I don't know if you guys have heard his piece on that. Have you heard his little comedy skit that he did on this?
No.
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny. So what he said is, he was doing a stand-up, and he said, I've personally been more pro-choice in my life as it pertains to the ability for people to have an abortion. But at the same time, we do kind of have to admit that there's something that seems a little bit strange about this whole it not being a life thing. It'd be like me putting like batter in a pan and putting it in the oven and just waiting for it to turn into a cake. And then you come, open the oven, throw my batter all over the ground, and I come and say, "Hey, that was my cake. What are you doing?" And your response to me is, "Well, it wasn't a cake yet." The premise of the argument just makes no sense to me personally. But I think, number one, it is a fight for understanding, and number two, it's a fight for life, effectively. We obviously like to point out the fact that a lot of people were protesting in response to Roe v. Wade being overturned, but there are also a lot of people who are celebrating Roe v. Wade getting overturned. I know at the church that I go to now, the Sunday after Roe v. Wade was overturned, the pastor made a big deal about it and mentioned it at the front to the pulpit, and everyone in the audience clapped. Pretty much everyone in the audience clapped. And it just goes to show that there are people in society who do recognize the significance of what this means, and the fact that it means that a lot more children, regardless, again, of what you think, whether it's a life or not, even though it seems like it is a life, just the evidence suggests, regardless of what you think on that, it's good to see that there will be more kids who will be saved and able to live their life and be born and able to change the world. Because, I mean, think about that. I always say that people who come from hard backgrounds or hard stories have a much more impactful story to tell the world, and they have a more impactful voice in society, it seems. So you've got lots of kids. I've heard several videos from people who said, yeah, I should have been aborted, but thankfully I didn't get aborted, and I was allowed to be carried to term, and I was born, and now I'm a world changer. I'm like, good for you, because you're a human being made in the image of God. That's exactly who you were meant to be, a world changer. And you can't be a world changer if you've been aborted for no good reason, especially according to the justification that's been given by the people who support your mother's ability to kill you. What do we think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you there, Chris. But to comment on your point about due process that you brought up just a minute ago, I just have to bring it up. Remember, I'm not a lawyer, so this is stuff I've read, and I think I understand to some level, but not to a lawyer's level, because it can't do that. But due process is just the process that's due, right? For example, if I'm not mistaken, Obama, right, when he was president, assassinated and got rid of an American citizen overseas, without trial, without anything. And they said that that was still following due process of that citizen, because the process was Obama said to the person manning the drone, through the chain of command, that yes, you can hit the button and send the missile to take out the American citizen. And that was all the process that was owed to that American citizen, right? And so due process is literally the process that you get from A to B for saying that, okay, what's the required process for an outcome to occur, right? And so the due process, right, of somebody that has an abortion, you could say, okay, they made the decision, right, to have unprotected sex, have get pregnant, and then therefore, because of those two steps, that was the process saying that you now have to have a baby, right? And that wouldn't be infringing on their due process rights, because if Obama's saying to a general who says to a colonel, or however that military structure works, hit the button and kill the American citizen is due process, then having sex and knowing the consequences of that unprotected is the process owed for having a baby, right? And so that is to understand due process in that very, very simple way. I think that hopefully that answers your question, Chris, about how due process is not being infringed, even though you said you couldn't find where the due process rights were infringed. But that's explaining it from that framework. To respond to Chris as well about the baby being real small, that it's the 24-week mark, or the time when they say that the baby's viable, that the abortion was banned until. And in my quick research, a baby at that time is the size of an ear of corn. So it's not like it's just a small clump of cells at the time they were allowing abortion up to via the Supreme Court. So to argue that that baby that's viable at 24 weeks is not human, is not alive, is not really a great argument. Because let's say here that I develop a technology, right, where I can deliver a baby, let's say at 22 weeks, put them into an incubator and have that baby grow out until it's developed properly. Well, then all of a sudden that viability becomes 22 weeks, etc. If I keep finding ways to push viability down, right, that baby becomes viable sooner and sooner and sooner, the more and more technology I develop in order to handle that child. So by putting an arbitrary 24 weeks as viability is not the way to define a life. Saying that it's not alive till it's viable is not logical, because then you're saying the more money or the more technologically privileged a fetus is, right, then the more alive it is, and the sooner it gets property rights, and sooner it gets the ability to live, because it has the ability to survive because of technology. Right. It's also the reason why they don't get abortion past viability in their same arguments, right? Because after it's viable, their argument is it's not alive before viability, and then they want to abortion up to 9 months after conception, right? It's able to survive on its own. So why are you trying to abort the child rather than deliver the child early and use medical technology to keep it alive? Right? We're just going to kill the child to kill the child. I don't get that logic. It doesn't make sense to me. If I was, king of the universe, right, and did this abortion thing, I would look at abortion in a very different way than we're thinking about it. I would think about it in a way of property interest for the fetus and for the child and for the mother of the child. Right? In that baby has a right to life. The second it's conceived, it has a right to life. Right? That's its initial right. Well, the mother of that child also has a right to life. Right? So whose right is more important? Well, if I'm inconvenienced by the child my inconvenience, my property rights in not having a child do not overcome the property interest of being alive for that child. Whereas if my life is being threatened by that child, then we have a conflict of interest between my life versus the child's life. And therefore, you can make a self defense argument saying that the removal of the child is in self defense of the mother for her continued survival and living. And that's the only place where I would consider abortion to be valid and proper. In the case of incest and rape, I hate to say it, but, what did that child do, right? Where did that child give up their rights um, and their right to live because of the actions of someone else? That child didn't do anything, and so why would it lose its rights to be alive based on the actions of somebody else, right? And that's where my stance is on that. And that case is at such a small percentage of abortions, it's almost not negligible or non-existent, right? And that's something that people don't want to argue and realize is that rape and incest pregnancies are so very small in society that it's ridiculous. So you shouldn't be legislating based on that notion. Chris, you got anything, or Gavin, you have anything to say?
Got anything, Gavin?
I mean, I just like the only thing that comes to mind is just that the child in like the cases of rape or incest it definitely is a small thing and like definitely a, something to take into account there. I can't imagine wanting to give everything in my life to that child.
Well, you
You
don't have
know,
to.
like pouring all of that love, and then that kind of like that raises another area that admittedly I haven't researched too much into, but like if we're going to be overturning Roe v. Wade and we're like with all of these new babies that will like were planned on not like killing, what are we doing to make sure that they have the best life possible? Because from what I've seen, the people getting abortions, they're not really connected with God if they're doing that in the first place.
Right.
Considering that, or going out and having unprotected sex without knowing the consequences. What are we doing to make sure that now that those people have brought children into the world, how will they be able to be, within God's love, or growing up in a household where they can get love, support, and all the nutrition that they need? And also just emphasis on the love. Like there's already so many kids in America who don't feel loved by their parents. Now the kids, who don't even they didn't want in the first place, where's the guarantee that they'll grow up and prosper without their parents' love?
Well, it's that in America we need to start fostering the notion of adoption and foster care more within the church. Is something that we've neglected. One of my good friends, I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he wants his name to be said, but he was adopted at birth because he was not planned and not expected, and he was adopted by a Christian family, and he was raised, and it was great, and he's a strong Christian man now. I was just at his wedding just a few years ago, and it's that we need to step into the gap and be the parents of the children that are not wanted. And that's something that we as the church need to do. It's a commandment, right, that we're supposed to look out for the widows and the orphans, but we as the church aren't often doing that, and that's something that we should start to do more. And in arguments, our country in America here, at least, has not been a place that's been very pro adoption recently. And we need to start looking at what in the legal system is discouraging adoption and begin to figure out, okay, here's how I'm going to vote. Here's the issues I'm going to petition for in order to make it easier for parents to adopt children and easier for them to get into good foster care if that's the option. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's more people right now that are looking for children than there are children that want to adopt in America. But because of the way that we've structured our legal system for that, they're not able to adopt. And that's something that we need to get fixed. Since Roe v. Wade is gone, we definitely need to get it fixed so that we're able to unite the parents that are going to love those children with those children that are no longer being aborted.
Yeah, that's good. As it pertains to legislation that impacts the abilities of families to adopt kids, I'm not specifically aware. All I know is that one thing that I'd personally propose is this good old thing called tax credits. Tax credits, I found, are the way to sort of encourage and incentivize certain things from the population in order to get a refund or a deduction of some sort, a reduction in how much you're giving the government effectively. So you're effectively getting your money back in a sense. But that said, there's a problem, like you said, with the legal system. And I think this is a tree that has deeper roots than we kind of realize, because you think about the fact that you have the federal government, they have a budget. They don't usually like to stick to their budget. I mean, I think it was last year where the current press secretary was bragging about how they reduced the budget deficit. Like, solid, nice. You reduced the budget deficit. There's still a deficit. So the federal government has a problem with sticking to its budget. And as such, it ends up needing more money than it should really need, which means that they're less likely to give people more of their own money back. So there are certain things like that that are kind of hindering the ability for us to incentivize certain of these behaviors. But I think besides the incentivization part, I think as the church, you're exactly right, Andreas. As the church, we do need to step in and fill that role a lot better. There's a pastor that I like listening to a lot. His name is Vodi Bakum Jr. I think he's actually a doctor, Dr. Vodi Bakum Jr. And he's got a church down in Texas. And he did say, I think in one of his sermons after Roe v. Wade was overturned, that it's a good thing. Make no mistake about it. It's a good thing Roe v. Wade was overturned, because it means life is prevailing, and kids that were not originally probably going to be able to be born, more of those will be born and be able to live their life. But the way he tied in the way that we need to be the church is that he has several organizations that he supports that promote the ability for these kids to enter a foster system and to be with families that want to actually to foster them, to raise them, and to realize the struggle that comes with being a child that was almost aborted, and that comes with being a child whose parents were not involved in their life really past making them. So I think supporting certain organizations like that and making sure that we as the church get out in that way and promote that, because there are lots of Christians out there in the world who are very pro-choice. I wouldn't consider myself pro-choice, but I definitely consider that up until maybe late last year, I was on the side of, okay, I don't like abortion, but I mean, in the case of maybe rape or incest, fine, that makes sense. And obviously as it pertains to health conditions, sure. But now I'm definitely more on the side of Andreas here, where I'm like, I really don't see any way outside of it threatening the life of the mother that it really makes sense, or that I can personally be consistent in my philosophy about life in supporting just the killing of a child, of a being, just because it was conceived in an illegal manner. Like, it's still a life. So I've personally fallen more in line with that way of thinking over the years. But it just goes to show we got to support our foster kids, man. We got to make sure that they're getting families that actually do love them and want to raise them, because it's just super important. And that's something we have to do as the church.
And just to add on to like the church perspective, it was like there's so much scriptural basis for it. Like, the only reason that I, a non-Jew, am sitting here worshiping the God of Israel, the Jewish people, is because he adopted me into his family. That's the reason that we're all finding God here. And I just feel like that's a really good way to, start introducing this concept of, because that was another thing in my research and some discussions that I've had with people that I was talking to them about what the Bible was about, and they were very adamant about. They were very adamant that it was actually about abortion, and not about love. And but that just goes to show that like the Christian movement in America, is they're kind of tied to this whole abortion thing, but we're not really tied to finding a solution out of that. And I feel like that's just such an easy change to really make. There's like, we're supposed to be loving, like Andreas was saying, like the orphans and the widows. Why aren't we known for doing that? What is, like, we need to be talking about that more, especially as it pertains to the landscape now. But yeah.
Yeah, that's important. Andreas, you got any other tie-ins for that?
Well, just to reiterate and say how important it is. When I was taking Greek, the professor of Greek talked about in one of the classes that adoption should be almost considered a sacrament, right? I'm not Catholic, but Catholics have certain sacraments that you got to do for salvation and all that. But he was talking about for Protestantism, right? The emphasis that the Bible puts onto helping the widows and orphans makes it almost a sacrament that you have to do, to adopt and to protect and to love on widows and orphans. And that's been very much lacking within the church, in America. I know some people that have adopted lots and lots of children, because they love children, and they're doing what God's called them to do. And more of us, right? More of us in the church need to do that. I don't really have anything else to say on adoption and loving children, in that statement. Chris, you want to move the topic on to the next section here?
I mean, I guess I could. So I guess the next point of discussion would probably be, well, what can we learn from this? Like, what can we learn from this? How can we respond to society's response to something that's a good thing? Like, it's not bad. It's a good thing, but they seem to have a very negative response to it. What do we take from that, and how can we respond when such similar things like that happen in future?
Well, I want to say something that we didn't really touch on, but I think is important for us to realize, is that this Roe v. Wade decision is not from the Constitution or from the amendments, but it was decided by a group of judges, out of thin air. And so when we can't just trust that when we elect somebody into office and they elect judges, that they're going to do what we want them to do, and they're going to do whatever the right thing is, right? They don't have to follow the Constitution in their decisions, even though they're supposed to, and they can just make stuff out of whole cloth, right? So you can't just trust the government to do the right thing. It's not what you're supposed to do, and you're not supposed to be able to do that. So you need to be thinking about, how do I, as a Christian, plan for and handle these major issues when I know the potential is there that the government's not going to be on my side, and they might just decide something that doesn't exist in order to mess with my position and make it difficult to either do something that's in Christ's will for us, or make something legal, or do something else that is not initially within the plan, right? You can't trust the government to solve. You can't trust the government to do what we want the government to do, right? Regardless of the side.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And that's a side note, but I think it's something that's worth saying is that there's no protection there. It's you and your community that are ultimately going to be the ones responsible for making the right choices and planning around, because you can't trust what they're going to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd like to get into, I guess, a little bit different of a perspective here, as more so from the Christian perspective. Three things three things in summary, I guess. Number one, we shouldn't, as Christians, ever be pro-choice. Like, there's no reason to. The Bible doesn't support it. God wouldn't support it. Jesus wouldn't support it. Pro-choice is not something we should be on board with as Christians. Secondly, we shouldn't be surprised that society is on board with abortion. Right? We shouldn't be surprised, because the Bible says numerous times that they're going to seek after things that are not of God. So we shouldn't be surprised when people do actually end up rioting in response to things that should be good things being overturned, like the instance of Roe v. Wade. And thirdly, we should not be surprised that a lot of Christians are pro-choice. Funny enough, one of the biggest issues plaguing the Christian community, and it's very unfortunate, but it's a very fixable problem, and it requires just a tad bit of effort, is the fact that like barely any Christians read their Bible. Barely any. And that's very surprising. Like, we are supposed to be the image bearers of Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. He's given us a revelation. God has given us a revelation of everything we need to know about him in order to live life well, in order to live a peaceful life in a very unpeaceful world. And very, very few Christians will open up this God-inspired revelation to understand the God they serve and to understand what he wants out of our lives. Like, it's absolutely, it doesn't make sense, but at the same time it does, because we as people are naturally broken, right? So we'll naturally seek to fix things practically in a way that we know how. So maybe, like, I'm going to go off topic a little bit here, but in the instance of maybe there's something that someone's struggling with in life, they'll go have lunch with a friend, maybe like an hour and a half, just to talk about life, talk through the struggle, and to encourage each other in a personal manner. Not very few Christians rather will spend even 15 minutes a day and just open up the Bible and read something about the God that they serve. Like, it doesn't make sense, but it does. So those are three things that we need to be aware of as Christians, is the fact that, number one, it doesn't make sense to be pro-choice. God is very clearly pro-life. Number two, we shouldn't be surprised that society is very pro-choice and very pro things that are anti-God. And number three, we should not be surprised that as of right now, a solid majority of Christians do not read their Bible and understand what God says about these issues.
Yeah. To piggyback off what Chris says, Romans 10, 14 and 15.
Oh no.
It says right
He's
here
gone
that
back to Romans.
I love Romans.
He loves Romans.
Okay, it says, this is NIV for those who like NIV. I could pick any version, but this was just what came up. It's how then can they call on the one that they have not believed in? How can they believe in one that they have not heard? How can they hear without somebody preaching it to them? How can anyone preach unless they are sent? And as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of the ones who bring good news, right? Even though, you can get preached and you can hear the message, right? How are you supposed to know what the Bible says unless you read it in order to do that preaching, in order to share what the word says, in order to give the biblical perspective on the issue? Unless you read it and you understand it, it's so important. This goes back to the topic last time, right? Where discussing the biblical perspective of an issue means that you need to do the research and understand the issue, right? Before Roe v. Wade got overturned, how would you be able to discuss with somebody that's in a crisis, that's going to maybe have an abortion, if you don't understand the issue and can't speak to it, understand what's going on, understanding that development of that child, understanding what they're going through emotionally, and understanding the scriptures and understanding how to talk to them? You need to develop and you need to grow as a Christian, so that if you find somebody in a crisis, you can talk to them, you could be God's light, and you can guide them down a biblical perspective and give real arguments for what they're doing, right? And that's something that we need to be able to do, right? If I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of regret that occurs after somebody has an abortion and some severe depression that occurs, right? Maybe, before abortion was returned to the States, right? If you didn't know that, you couldn't bring that up and talk with them through that. If you didn't know the development of that child, you couldn't say, oh, this is living, this is breathing, this is alive at 8 months, right? If they were trying to do an abortion at 8 months, if they didn't know, right? So you need to be able to stand in that gap, know that the details behind the issue, and be able to communicate that to somebody in a loving way, in order to do what God's called you to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very true. I would like to point out, by the way, that I do not have anything personal against Romans. That's an inside joke that we have. Andreas loves pointing out every single instance that he can about Romans when it pops up, whether it's at church or in conversation. He loves it. So that's the joke I was making there. But Gavin, you got any points to add on to this discussion?
Yeah, I kind of want to throw in my new Christian perspective into this whole thing. And as someone who is still like faltering on the line of pro-choice and, pro-life, and someone also on the left side of the political discussion, I would encourage those who disagree with the Bible also to look at it, to talk about these matters too. Just in the instances of some people I know, they look at only some parts of the Bible. I remember being shown a verse about, I don't remember the exact verse or where it was, but it was a verse technically about abortion. It was more of just if a woman was being adulterous, it was a pregnancy test kind of thing. But I would, if you want to be informed on this debate, because one of the big, like, I believe it was the ADF. I don't remember what it stands for, but they're a Christian organization who helped provide a lot of the legal backing for this case and legal support to get the Dobbs decision passed. If you're like, you can't untie Christianity from abortion. They're like, Christianity conflicts with it. So if you're going to be talking to someone who's on the other side of the aisle or from another faith, or you're not from the Christian faith and you're talking to someone about who is Christian about this, then you need to be versing yourself in what they're talking about too. Like, you got to see the parts that are like, here's the parts where it's talking about pro-life and loving everyone else. Where do I stand? Where can I use this information and discussion with this person, just to get more of a general basis for a healthy discussion on this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good. And that actually ties into my tie-in here, which is, how can we tie this back to the whole Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision? It just goes to show you got to understand the issues that are being presented. You got to understand all sides and opinions thoroughly, and you cannot compromise on the truth. If you apply those three very simple to put effort into practices, then you'll start to see some change, not only in your own life and just the way that you feel. Like, it's weird what not compromising on the truth does. It is. When you don't compromise on the truth, there's almost this sense of like gratification that you just feel it. It's just a feeling of gratification that comes from knowing this is true and I'm living in accordance with the truth. This feels good. I think a lot of people could use that, because in a society where a lot of people are depressed, a lot of people are anxious, I think we can look at a lot of these people who suffer from these symptoms and say, hey, are you compromising anywhere? Are you trying to be your own dictator in your own life? It's what I call, I guess now, goyol symptoms, God of your own life. Are there any symptoms that you're presenting in your life that you're not even realizing, but you're just subconsciously presenting to yourself and just acting on without really considering whether it's good or not, in accordance with God, not in accordance with you? So I guess that's my summary back to the tie-in. Just understand the issues being presented. Make sure that you're not responding in an emotional way over an objective way. Understand why decisions are made, and seek to support people who do seek to promote truthful opinions and truthful objectives in whatever level of life they are, whether they're a leader, whether they're just somebody who's trying to start a grassroots movement. Support those people who are not compromising on the truth. Be confident in those people to generate change in society and get on board with them. And I think we'll actually start to see some good change in society.
Yep.
Amen to that, brother.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
No, I'm good. I'm just going to say, remember to like, subscribe, share. Whether or not you're listening to this live or you're listening to the audio on Spotify, remember to share so we can get this conversation out to more people. We enjoy engaging with you in the chat. So hopefully we can see you there next time live. We start at 6:30 every Saturday. And we look forward to talking with you guys again. Next week, we're going to be going over, in 2022 terms, we're going to be talking about Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard and discussing that and understanding what happened there. And for the current topic of the week, we don't know what it's going to be because it hasn't happened yet. We look forward to seeing you guys next week, 6:30 p.m., followed by another show at 7:45. Peace.
Exactly. He rolled right into my conclusion for me. I love that. It was so seamless. I wasn't even expecting it. It's beautiful. But yeah, you guys for listening to this episode. If you listen to both episodes, huge shout out to you. We really appreciate your listenership. Even if you listen to just one episode, we appreciate your listenership. But like Andreas said, yeah, like, subscribe, share, get this message out if you enjoy it, which why wouldn't you? Because we're awesome. Especially Andreas, even though he didn't have his cowboy hat. And that's, we can work with it. Hopefully the audio sounded better. I don't know if the chat is interacting, or the chat interacted. Oh, everything's just been made right. Everything has been made right, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening to this post-recorded, Andreas just threw on that absolutely beautiful cowboy hat of his, in the nick of time, just before the stream ended. So we got that blessing from the knowledge of the cowboy hat, of course. Oh, he's saying peace. He's ready to go to bed. I can see that. Alrighty. Anyways, thank y'all for tuning in. We will see you all next Saturday. Until then, stay safe, stay cool, I guess. No, don't stay cool. Stay warm because it's wintertime. Well, I guess if you're not in a wintry hemisphere, maybe you're listening to this from like Perth, Australia, and it's like
stay classy. Is what you mean. Stay classy.
Stay classy. Sure, stay classy. There you go. Alrighty. Stay classy until our next episode. Anyways, peace.